This is Jesse Bishop, aka Street Cleaner, and you're listening to Pixelated Audio, episode 150.
Welcome back to Pixelated Audio, a podcast focusing on game audio, its history, and the people behind it. We're your hosts. I'm Brian, and this is Gene. We've got another special guest joining us today, a synthwave artist and game composer, Jesse Bishop, also known as Street Cleaner. Jesse, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Stoked to be here.
And we're happy to have you, Jesse. We've actually known Jesse for a few years. We're huge fans of his music, and we have him on today to talk about his music for the game Street Cleaner, or Street Cleaner the video game, an NES-style platformer that draws inspiration from games like Ninja Gaiden, Castlevania, and Sunsoft's Batman. We've been following the progress of this game for quite some time now, and it was ultimately released this January on Steam, and very recently in April on Nintendo Switch, so we're really excited to talk with you about it.
Hell yeah. I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, we were hoping it was going to come to Switch soon, and I pulled the trigger and bought it day one. I don't know how far I am into it right now, but I'm having a blast. It's great. You know, I love these games. It's not really that complex. And what I like about it is that kind of nostalgic simplicity, but also like awesome bangers that you thrown in. So that track that brought us in was Decaying City from stage 1-1. Tell us about this track.
So when Brooks is the other part of Creaky Lantern Games, and we've been working together for quite a while, since around 2011. But anyways, when we start a new project, we try to feel it out and create like a sense of uniformity, you know, like as far as what's the art going to look like, you know, and what's the music going to sound like and stuff. And early on, I had experimented with a lot of different types of music. You know, I'm a big fan of, you know, the Sega Genesis FM synth sound and stuff. So we messed around with that, but it didn't quite mesh well with the visual style that we had. And eventually I decided to try writing some songs in Famitracker, which is software that I wasn't really familiar with. I've been using trackers since, you know, the 90s, but this was, if anybody's never used Famitracker before, it's its own animal. There's nothing like it that I've ever used in my life as far as how it handles sounds and stuff like that. So I had experimented with writing a few songs, and I talked to a few friends for, you know, help. If you've ever heard of the band Martial Art, Jeff, he hooked me up with some of his project files that he had that I got to pick apart and see exactly how he did some stuff. And so the first real track that I had written was the one that you guys that we just heard. And that was for our first level that we had, that we were working on, which was in development. The first stage that we had really gotten a lot of progress in was the Foundry stage, which I think would be stage 5. Mm-hmm. And so that was the stage 5 theme at the time. And then, later as development went on, so we decided to stick with that. We were going to stick with that formula, with those sound types using Famitracker. And then, I had created my own little drum samples for that rather than, using existing ones. And those are actual drum samples that I used in Street Cleaner songs.
Oh, cool.
But we had, later in development, it just made more sense for that song to be a different stage. And we kind of did the reshuffling of things because, as things progress in development, they take on different forms and different feels and stuff. And so what works for one level during, the first half of development may not work for that level anymore when that level fully gets fleshed out, or stage, I should say, fully gets fleshed out and it takes on a different vibe. So that song just was one of the first ones I wrote and ended up being stage one.
I know what you're saying. Like, until everything kind of comes together, it could go anywhere. And now when you hear it, I mean, especially for you, because you've had such a strong relationship with the development process, that I'm sure that this track, Decaying City, only sounds like it works for, stage 1-1 now.
Yeah.
So I totally understand. And like, energy level has to kind of match what you're doing in a sense. It's this narrative that, without the music, you lose a lot, right? So if the music was like this really floaty kind of like chill dubstep, I don't know if it would actually go with this, dark back alley Sunsoft Batman, kind of game.
Yeah.
So I totally get it.
I'm glad you guys brought up Batman a couple times now, because like that really is like one of the biggest stylistic inspirations, for this game. We borrowed or utilized all of our favorite little things, throughout a very narrow era of gaming, and definitely borrowed a lot of the aesthetics from Batman. But I'd say one thing that I was really influenced by that soundtrack, which is unmatched. The Sunsoft Batman soundtrack is one of the greatest, of all times.
Yeah. Like we did one of our first episodes. I think it was like episode 10 was about Sunsoft Batman.
Pretty much every game podcast has done like a number of episodes on Sunsoft music. It's all so great.
Oh yeah. Blaster Master and Sunsoft and Batman are like the two of the greatest in my opinion.
Well, you got that just really driving, like deep thud bass kick drum in there that like really like destroys everything else around it. I love that. And then this like, really nice like tweeter melody on top, and it's really just being completely driven by the low end. And I think that's where the inspiration, I mean, at least when I'm hearing it, I'm like, oh my God, this is so Sunsoft, right? Like it sounds like this was, a game that was made back then with a lot of the same technique thrown in. I like it.
Yeah, I really did, analyze, the NSF files that I could. I wanted to see exactly what they did to get that delay effect and stuff like that. And obviously, I broke the mold. I went a little bit, because that's kind of a heavy metal album. If you think about the Batman soundtrack, it's kind of heavy metal. So I went a little bit more kind of like rock and roll-ish with the Street Cleaner soundtrack. And also I took liberties with the amount of channels that I could use, and I added, so I have my basic 5, and then I added 5 more five more of the N163 channels, just because I really wanted to drive home the whole, like, it's hard to make anything synthwave-ish without chords. You know what I mean? Because that's so intricate to that kind of like, it's hard to explain.
Dun, 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 dun,
yeah, exactly.
I can't sing it.
Dun,
in my head, it made sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had to have chords, so I came up with, I built a few little instruments to use, and I tried not to make them too of the main part of the songs, but more of accompanying, sounds. So yeah, sorry if I'm getting a little verbose here. You got
no
problem.
No, this is great. This is great.
We were going to bring up all this stuff at some point in the show, but that actually does give us a good segue into our next track, which is the stage 1 boss fight.
Ooh!
All right, let's take a listen. that was the boss fight from stage 1, composed by Street Cleaner.
Ooh, I'm getting those 20XX vibes throughout this whole soundtrack already. Brings me back.
This first boss is so frustrating.
Actually, the first boss, I could give game tips all day long, but the best method to take him out is just to go straight at him.
That's the only way I could do it. Just go straight at him and just like expect to lose half your health and just keep slashing away.
Yeah, the first stage is Mega Man X tutorial stage. Anyways, we kind of felt that the game really starts on stage 2, but you have to have that whole stage. First stage is just teaching the player how to dive kick and do that kind of stuff. If you can't dive kick, then you won't even get past the first stage. We kind of drive that home in that first stage, and then after that, free to use whatever techniques you want.
Awesome. Yeah. So what this boss is like a cowboy kind of thing, or
he's a hard hat guy.
He's hard hat Rich. He's a construction worker.
That's right. I played it like last week, so I can't remember.
He's an open shirt construction worker.
That's right. He's like twice the size of your character, and
all the bosses are bigger. Yeah. I'd done a game with Brooks for Xbox Live back in 2012 called Eternum, where we had when we were putting everything together, we had decided that each boss fight was going to have a unique song to that boss fight kind of thing. But with this one, is the first time we worked on a game that had bosses in it again, and so we decided that we were just going to we were trying to make an impactful ending to the game. And to do that, we had to build expectations. And then when you play the game and you get to the end, it should break what your expectations are. So by the time you get to a boss, you should hear the boss theme, which is the same theme for every single boss, and so you get into the pattern of, okay, I hear this music. This means it's the final boss. It's not the mid boss, that kind of thing. So we're kind of trying to like subconsciously train people into feeling a certain way. Oh man, this boss is frustrating, blah, blah, blah. But it's the boss because you hear that song. Therefore, when you beat him, it's the end of the level. We kind of condition people.
Right.
When you get to the end, you'll understand that we kind of shatter expectations because we had built expectations through the first 6 stages, and then you get to the 7th stage and we just kind of throw that out the window.
That's awesome. Well, don't tell me because I haven't beaten it yet. I gotta get it myself. I'm experiencing this. It's really fun. It's a really fun game. I was surprised just how like friendly and like old school it feels. It's not trying to be like a fast moving Ninja Gaiden. It really does have that platforming like Batman beat 'em up feel to it at the same time as the platforming elements. So ton of fun.
Yeah, everything should be deliberate, like every enemy isn't randomly clicked and dropped. It's there exactly on that spot that it should be, and everything matters as far as what is your wind-up time on your bat attack versus how many bullets you should have at this point versus how fast your character could walk. And what a lot of people don't understand in the comments section, when people give us, everybody's a critic, hey, you should do this, you should do that, is just by changing the walking speed, it just destroys everything,
Right.
And so yeah, that was something that, Brooks is a genius, and he could talk about it more in detail than I can, but he had set a specific speed. He's going to walk at this speed. That means the enemies are going to appear this far away, and then they're going to become, and everything matters, so we did that on purpose. There are other games, that have come out recently that basically go really, really fast, like boom, boom, chop, chop, ninja, slash, all this other kind of stuff. And we decided that's not what we wanted to do. We wanted to, do the Shatterhand Batman, thing, Castlevania 3, most definitely.
And I think a lot of people could appreciate that because I certainly did. I really liked just how it didn't, like, I didn't feel rushed. It felt like the energy was there with the music and like not knowing when the bad guys are going to appear on the screen. And the other thing I like about this too is that if you go off the screen and you go back to an area, those enemies will come back. They like respawn.
Classic.
So it's a classic. Yeah.
Oh yeah. You can turn that off if you want. We put an assist mode in the game.
Nah, man.
But I've never turned it off myself. I just trusted. We had some really awesome testers. That have just been immensely helpful for the last year testing the game, and I just kind of like I deferred that to them. Like, you guys can play around with turning that off. I'm going to leave it on.
Love it. Well, let's get into our next track here. This is Courser from stage 2.
All right, that was Courser from Stage 2 from Street Cleaner the video game, composed by Street Cleaner.
That's me!
A lot of breath. A lot of breath in this one. Yeah, it is you.
Oh,
yeah,
man. I just get deep Guardian Legend and Journey to Silius vibes. There's like very specific tracks in my mind when I hear these.
Oh,
like,
I love it.
I know them by heart. You know, Stage 2 in Journey to Silius and like the ending theme to Guardian Legend, basically.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. Like nice and just this really
it's such a great mood.
Wide open beat. Yeah.
So really we had a transition between each level. So the transition between each stage. Well, each stage starts with the motorcycle pulling up and the street cleaner character getting off the motorcycle, and then at the end of each stage, the motorcycle's just magically back there, and the character gets on it and drives off screen. And we wanted a wind down type moment, like Doom. You would beat a stage, and then it would give you all your little tally marks, and you would just kind of hang out on that map, So we kind of wanted to do that, just to kind of break up any type. We didn't want to have to throw somebody into the next stage, kind of thing, So Brooks had designed this like never-ending freeway, motorcycle scene that loops in between each stage, and we needed to come up with a good feeling song. Originally, I had transposed a street cleaner song from years ago called Murder Cycle, but it just didn't feel right, So I had written that, but there's no bridge, there's no chorus, there's no verse. It's just this. It's just I forget what that's called, where every bit of that song could be played over itself and it would sound just fine, but it just kind of cycles through all the different modes, but it never actually changes. There's a word for that.
I probably knew it at one point in time. I with my now ancient music education that I don't use. But
right.
you know, it's cool. Like, I do feel like when I listen to this soundtrack, there's these parts that's like, this is so familiar, but it also sounds contemporary. Like this track in particular, and I know on the album you actually have like a fully produced version of this, and we'll talk about some of that in a bit. And like I can hear the like modern production, but it still sounds like a classic NES track. And I think you did a successful job of marrying those two. I don't know, you know what I mean? Like navigating that really tricky balance of not just being super referential only. And, you know, I love that aspect of it. Yeah.
Still giving it your own touch and making it something unique too. Yeah. So Jesse, this question we always ask guests that we have on the show: what is your musical background? How did you get started in music? You have a ton of albums that you can just listen to right now, and Bandcamp and all over the place. How did you get started?
My mom is a music enthusiast, I guess you could say, and so I showed some interest in it when I was a kid. So she signed me up with some piano lessons early on in life, and I think I want to say like in like middle school, it wasn't cool to play piano anymore. But then, you know, you circle back around in high school when, you know, you see that kid with the guitar playing Wonderwall and you're like, oh man, why is he so popular? And, you know, and so I learned to play drums, and I was primarily a drummer for most of my life, music career. And then I'd been in lots of other people's bands, I guess I could put it that way. I'd always had an interest in video game music my entire life. I don't know if it's how my brain works or what, but I've never really been too big of a fan of music with words in it. So I naturally gravitated towards like whatever I could get my hands on as far as like movie soundtracks, and more specifically Red Book Audio. So I could, you know, listen into Sega CD games and Sega Saturn games and PlayStation games and stuff like that. You know, that was my primary jam. So I've always wanted to work in video game music, but maybe I didn't have the chops to do it, you know. And it was actually meeting Brooks about 11, 12 years ago. He kind of instigated my progression, I guess, my evolution as a musician, from being a guy who was in other people's bands to taking everything head on myself. And he actually, like, you know, heard some of the demo stuff that I'd made, and he'd actually really pushed me to evolve that. And one of the big catalysts was when he asked me to write music for a game that he was working on. And that was just like, well, here's my shot. I better hit this as hard as possible, because I might not get an opportunity like this ever again, kind of thing, you know. And I worked really hard on that, and that game got shelved, but then that opened the door for another game, you know, and et cetera. And that kind of built from there. You know, and he's always been involved with the Street Cleaner project as well. You know, he was kind of the catalyst to get me to... My whole thing was, I said I always wanted to write music for movies, and he was like, why don't you? And I was like, because I don't have a movie. And he's like, what's stopping you? Like, whatever, you know? And so that's how Street Cleaner started, is, you know, I came up with this idea of a movie that didn't exist. So I wrote the soundtrack to this movie that doesn't exist. And the way that I wrote music already had an 80s tinge to it. So I might as well make the movie an 80s movie, you know? So the original Street Cleaner album was like a found soundtrack to a movie, you know, from the 80s. Then the synthwave thing happened, you know, movies like Drive came out, and Stranger Things and all that stuff. And so by the time that had picked up, I was kind of a de facto artist that had already had a presence at the time, under the synthwave umbrella, the kind of throwback 80s sounding umbrella. So that was really nice. You know, like, there's no way anybody can predict what's going to happen in the future, and timing is everything. And I was lucky enough to be there when synthwave was really picking up steam. Yeah, and so that's what I've been doing ever since. And that's, you know, this game is the game that is based off the same movie. You know what I mean? You know, we workshopped like what would a game, so if the album came out in 1988 and it's the soundtrack to a movie from 1988, what would the game be like? Because every hit movie had a game, you know. So
oh right,
yeah. In the movie, Street Cleaner isn't, you know, stomping on rats and stuff, but in the game he sure as hell is, you know, like.
Yeah, I mean, because why not? Those giant rats need to be stomped on.
Yeah.
So you talked about Brooks being a huge influence on your music career, basically just kind of nudging you in the direction that you were, that you ended up going. What would you say like your other musical influences were, aside from the game itself? You mentioned, synthwave and 80s soundtracks and stuff like that. But looking back, what would you kind of define as like the influence, or like a handful of influences that drove you forward?
Video game music, 100%, like...
but isn't that for nerds?
Right. You know what? Okay. So... And
also game music isn't real music.
Right. Oh my God. Like, I didn't let people at school know what was in my... I graduated high school in 2000, so I'll put that out there. That dates me. But other people, had their Sony Walkmans and Discmans and stuff, and they're listening to whatever CDs were out at the time. I literally always had my tape player because the Sega Genesis had a headphone jack and my boombox had a microphone jack. So I could go into video games that had music select screens and I can make mixtapes just from the music from, that stuff. And then I learned how to plug my Super Nintendo into the microphone jack. Then I was making all, that kind of stuff. And that's what I listened to. So when I was walking, sitting on the bus going to school or whatever like that, I was listening to Road Rash or Mortal Kombat 1 or something like that. That's mostly what everything that I listened to. And then, like I said, when Red Book Audio stuff started popping up, that was phenomenal for me, because I didn't have to do that. I could literally just, record Chuck Rock 2, Son of Chuck, directly off of my Sega CD right onto a tape, or I could just bring the CD with me to school and listen to it on a CD player or something,
That's hilarious. What's funny is that, like, what you're describing sounds like an uncommon thing, but you have no idea how many people have been on the show said that same thing.
You're probably the second or third person to mention the headphone jack on the Genesis in like the last 6 months.
I believe it.
In the last 6 months, yeah. I mean,
that's one of my qualms. Like I feel like when I was in middle school, I was the only kid with a 32X. Like, period. Nobody had a 32X.
You're still the only one with a 32X.
well, and then I got the Sega CD, so I had like the big monstrosity, you know what I mean, and and the Sega channel and all that stuff. Like that's what my life was, and I felt like I was the only one because kids at school were too cool. You couldn't. Everybody else was like, "Well, you still play Sega? You're stupid." Blah blah blah. Like everybody. I wouldn't dare let anybody know that I was still playing Kirby Superstar or something like that. But then now it's almost like everybody is nostalgic. Like, oh yeah, I had a 32X. I'm thinking like, no, you didn't. I went to high school with you. You made fun of me because I had a 32X. Don't even pretend like you were a nerd.
Or they were all just like, they all had it and they just never wanted to admit
right.
it, like,
Grandma got you this. It's for your Tendo.
All right, well, let's move on to our next track. This is a really cool track. It's from Stage 2. It's called Full Throttle. So let's take a listen.
right, that was Full Throttle by myself, Street Cleaner, for the game Street Cleaner, the video game, or as I like to call it, me, the video game.
You know what? I don't know how much of this is subconscious, but, I've played so many Nintendo games over the years that, like, stage 2 is where things get serious. Like, the music is always really upbeat and energetic, and then it's like, all right, playtime's over. Here, like, pay attention.
Yeah,
and
no
I
more
feel like
messing
the music
around.
matches that energy. Like, there's this something about it, it's like the off eighth notes that make me just, like, want to pay attention to the music and just focus. So
that track, believe it or not, like, was almost not a last minute, but a late in the process replacement. I had stage 2 was actually our third stage, but just because of the way that it shaped up, it ended up getting moved to the second stage and getting transposed with stage 2. So stage 3 in the game was the original stage 2, but originally I had a different song actually, which is on the Bandcamp soundtrack. It's as a bonus track that I called Hot Roof, that ended up getting replaced with what's there now, which like I was saying earlier, like, as things take shape and as they change, the tone of the music needs to change with it too, and so I was just really proud of this song, which is one of the later songs that I produced for the game.
Mm-hmm.
And it ended up working really well for this stage.
Really like this one. This is a good one. And I want to actually talk about how you compose this, because a lot of the music you said was in Famine Tracker, and you mentioned using adding additional channels and stuff like that. So I was wondering if you can kind of go through that and you can walk us through what some of these channels are actually doing. We know the 5 channels from the 2A03. Let's start with the first 2 pulse channels and what they're doing.
What I ended up doing is the songs kind of split into a couple different parts, in that a lot of games like Bad Dudes and Batman would just do fifths with the first 2 pulse channels, and so that gives it that more kind of like heavy metal power chord kind of feeling. And so that's what I did here, is the first 2 pulse channels for the first couple measures are just fifths, power chords. And then it will switch over into the pastiche that carries throughout the whole game. There's the little dun 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 dun. It's kind of the pastiche that I've used in Street Cleaner, for the last 7 years or so. Is that little riff will appear in almost every album that I've released, somewhere kind of buried in there. And we really brought it to the forefront in the game. It plays every time you beat a boss. So when it switches over to that, where Pulse 1 will be the lead, and Pulse 2 is a slightly quieter version of the same instrument from Pulse 1, but it's delayed like 3 steps. Mm-hmm. And so that gives it that echoey, feel. And then after that, those measures, when it goes back into fifths, it just jumps straight back into fifths, where the same instruments used for Pulse 1 and Pulse 2. And so it will jump back and forth between those two, kind of using every little trick in the book there, That's I call that Mega Man bass. It's just, you can't do volume with that channel. It is what it is, which really blows me away, because sometimes I hear tracks and I'm just like, how on earth did they accomplish that? And so, yeah, that's just basically, it's 16th notes, do 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 do. Throughout the entire song, it just kind of builds the main structure of the entire song.
Nice.
As far as all the root notes, I didn't really do anything special with that as far as like mirroring the drums or anything. That's just hats. The whole thing is just hats. I stick to an open hat and kind of like a crash, and then kind of a quieter closed hat, kind of thing. So those are 2 samples that I had made I had pulled those drum samples, the kick and the snare, from some Street Cleaner songs. I tend to use the same samples. Like when I have to use samples, I tend to use the same ones a lot because I'm so familiar with how they behave. And so that becomes inherent, like a quality of my music. Like, oh, this sounds like a Street Cleaner song. And it's like, oh, because Jesse's lazy and he used the same kick and snare again. But
continuity.
Right? Yeah, continuity. So what I had done is I went back and I had found, a couple of the samples that I had used a lot in previous stuff from other albums. And I had found this neat little piece of this little tool, which I forgot the name of it, which allowed me to convert those samples into something I could load onto FamiTracker. And I had originally made 3. I had done a kick, a snare, and then a kick and snare laid over itself at the same time, because you can't play 2 samples at the same time. But if the sample is 2 samples at the same time, then there you go. It's like faking it.
Ooh, that's thinking with your head right there.
Thanks. But I ended up not using it. So instead of in a non-FamiTracker song, I would have the kick on 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the snare on 2 and 4, right? But in this case, for this song specifically, it didn't need to be that mechanically pounding, that kind of thing. I wanted it to be more of like a kind of thing. And so I ended up not using that overlaid sample. I think the entire song, I just used those 2 samples in that channel.
Awesome. So moving on to the expansion chip, which is common it's a Namco at the N163 chip. It's a wavetable synth chip. Could you tell us about how you have 5 here? So what are you doing here?
I have 5 here, and it does work on hardware. So I am blown away. I was actually worried there in the beginning that these songs wouldn't be able to play on hardware because of how many expansions I did. But when I saw it actually working, I was pleased. So apparently having 5 of those N163s is possible, at least on some of the more recent EverDrives. But I created 5, and 1 and 2 were primarily used for, at the end of every second measure for the first few bars, the volume will fade away on those 2. And so for there to be a little bit of movement and not just bass and drums, I added a little bounce, a little boop, 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 boop thing. It's hard to explain. Mm-hmm. And that's all that I used the Namco channels 1 and 2 for in the entire song, I think. I'm pretty sure that's it. I'm looking at it right now, and yeah, that's it. But channels 3, Namco 3, 4, and 5, those are my chords. And so awesome. I had taken and I had mirrored Pulse 1 and 2, and I'd put those into Namco 4 and 5, and then I pulled those back 2 steps, so it created a little bit of an echo. I made that a really quiet instrument too, because I didn't want it to detract from the lead, but I wanted it to be there to fill it out a little bit more, because without it, it wasn't. I'm just, I don't know if I have imposter syndrome or what, but I just am not really feeling that I can. I hear what some of the people do with 5 channels, and it's mind blowing, and then I see what I can do with 5 channels, and it doesn't impress me as much. But who knows? If I saw my own stuff through somebody else's eyes, it may have worked. But by adding those 5 Namco channels, I was able to make something that pleased me, and also stayed authentic to what it was I was trying to accomplish.
That's the most important thing, that it sounds good to you. Like, who cares? Like, who cares how many channels you use and how many you don't use? Like, I guess it's 8 channels that you have access to with that chip. For some reason I thought it was 6, but
damn.
Honestly, if you can make it sound good to you and accomplish what your needs are, and what you're trying to convey to the listener, like, really, that's all that matters. There's a lot of other chips that have so many channels that people don't even want to use, because it doesn't really add anything. It doesn't give anything extra to the track. So I think just using what you need works. And sometimes, those limitations, we've talked about this numerous times, those limitations actually aid to the creativity process. And
the other thing to remember is, you could get really good at using just the 5 channels, but how much time you have, right? Like, by the time you get that good, like, it'll be a year from now. I mean, I have so much respect for all the fantastic chiptune artists that can get the Game Boy, the NES to sound amazing, but that does not come easy. I mean, this is a years-long journey to get to that level. So, you're basically contorting things in a room so, like, it looks like you're in this tiny little box, right? Like, there's talks about single-channel echoes to free up more space, and there's so many tricks to do it, but it's all, like, from practice and just learning and understanding,
Early on when I was learning, trying to find my footing on Famitracker, I had talked with I'd shown a few project files with a buddy of mine, Sean Babbitt, and he was showing me, he's like, look at all this empty space you have in between here. Like, you have a stop on this note, and then you have all of this empty space. Like, fill that up, put something in there, and that didn't ever really occur to me that, like, I was looking at it from look at the volume of stuff I put into here, and his view was, look how much more you can put in here.
Like the density of it.
Yeah.
I see.
And then, you look at people like, I think right now, today, the de facto Famitracker guy is Jake Kaufman, in my opinion. And I know, but if you look at some of his projects, it's mind-bending. Like,
there's not a 16th that is empty, basically.
No, there's not. There's always something in there, and he's done it to a point where when other folks do it now, it's like, that's very Kaufman-esque. It's very Vert-esque.
You know who else litters Famitracker with basically removes all the white space is Chibi Tech also.
Same thing. Really?
Yeah,
she's amazing. We had her on our show a little while ago, and one of the tracks she played was, I think, just straight Famitracker 5-channel.
They were just about all straight
there's
Famitracker.
This dubstep track in there that, like, blew my mind. And I think I said this, literally, if I hadn't seen the thing scrolling in Famitracker, I wouldn't have believed the sounds that were coming out of it. It was incredible.
I love it when that happens. That's one of the greatest things ever.
So we're talking about Full Throttle, this NES version of it, but Full Throttle was then mastered in a studio. So let's take a listen to that real quick. This is really interesting. That was Full Throttle, the studio remastered version, composed by Street Cleaner.
Dude, I just went to see Street Cleaner last week, and they got the song from the movie in the game.
Right?
So what's the story? Because I know on the album, I think you have about 4 tracks that you fully produced. I assume you did those afterwards just because there's so many more tracks, NSF tracks, NES. Why did you pick those? Or what? Just tell us a little bit about the production process here.
Originally, it was, I wanted to do every song in the game, as a full-blown, track. But, unfortunately, it doesn't always work out like that, sitting behind my DAW and trying to recreate a song that I had written in Famitracker sometimes just sounds like a poor cover, and it's hard to really force it. But some songs just worked really well. Some songs just translated really easily. And by far, that one's my favorite, actually, out of, I gotta say, since I finished that track, it's been my favorite track that I've made. I'm so pleased with myself, and I'm giving myself such a big pat on the back over that, because I really kind of broke out of my comfort zone, and there's no, it's not a standard old Street Cleaner, dance track. It's a really fast pace, high RPM, by the time you get to the end, double bass, just everything's getting thrown at you kind of thing. I broke out some real synthesizers to get some cool sounds out of them and stuff, and just tried to go whole ham on that one track. And unfortunately, I wish I could have done it for the whole album, but it just didn't really work out. But it did work out for that one. And I also did Courser and then Revenger 2.0.
Yeah, I think this is the one that I gravitated towards, and I don't know if it was just like what you said, but something about this one was the one that I really felt like captured the full studio sound. I mean, they're all great tracks, the ones that you remastered, but somehow this one just stuck with me the most, and that's why I wanted to pick it for the show. Yeah.
What's really funny though is when you put out something, you don't. I love looking at analytics, because I always have an idea in my head of how things are going to go, and then we know I'll put it out. Like for example, I put out an album in 2014. And I had a track on it that I thought was going to be the standout track, And then last minute, I kind of added another track that I had been working on that wasn't really finished, but I put it on the album anyways. And here we are, 7 years later, and that track that was unfinished that I was originally going to scrap is my number one freaking song,
Awesome.
Dr. Disrespect used it as his theme song over and over and over again, and it just became this thing. There's videos that other people have uploaded it on, making their own little music videos on YouTube and stuff with it that have,
What's the name of the track?
It is called
because we're gonna play a clip, just a tiny little clip right now.
Okay, one thing I got to tell you about Street Cleaner is he's really bad with naming his songs and remembering what they're called.
It was also 7 years ago.
Yeah, it's called Dark Pursuit. It's off the album Payback. Gotcha.
We'll put a link to that for sure in the show notes. And
okay. and it's just really just me playing with a chord structure and arpeggio. So with Street Cleaner, the video game, the album, which naming this was a hard one. But with this, I really thought that Full Throttle was going to be the standout track, and I thought that was going to be the one that people gravitated towards. So much so, I kind of released it as a single beforehand. And that wasn't the case. Believe it or not, the full version of Courser, track 4, is the one that really blew up and took wings.
That's
I
interesting.
can see that. It definitely has a little bit more of like the conventional synthwave sounds, a little slower, a little bit more mellow. But for me, Full Throttle is the one.
It reminds me of if I was going to compare it to another artist that I did listen to, is maybe kind of like Laserhawk in there a little bit.
I know that guy.
Oh, nice. Yeah. and like I'm a fan, and I feel like it has some of his stuff has that really more high octane feel to it. And
he has an album called Redline that's really up there. Yeah,
I mean, I can picture the album in my head, but so it kind of gave me that vibe from it. But let's back up a little bit.
That's an amazing compliment. Thank you.
But backing up a bit here, we wanted to talk about the partnership between Brooks Bishop and yourself, like Creaky Lantern Games. So how did this all begin?
I went to high school with Brooks, but I didn't know him. I had a computer lab where I took computer lab in like 6th period, and you would sit alphabetically. And so I had the second computer in, and he had computer lab the period before me. And so apparently he sat at that same computer. So we found a way to where we could leave a note, right? And they were Macs, they were all Power Macs or whatever. But we found a way that we could leave a note, and whoever sat on that computer, no matter who was logged in, they could read that and respond to it. And so I had this correspondence with this guy who had my same last name. And he's still the only other person I've ever met that has my last name that lives around me. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of other bishops out in the world, but it was kind of weird because the only other bishops I knew were my family. So that's how I knew this guy, but I never actually met him in person. But we would leave little notes and be like, dude, Guile could beat up Ryu any day. Shut up, blah, blah, blah. That kind of thing.
Dude, that's so funny.
That's a great story.
Right? Years and years and years later, I was at a LAN party, and a buddy of mine was like, hey, man, you got to come to these LAN parties. They're pretty great. So I'm at this LAN party, and I'm, first time ever being at a LAN party. I really don't know how all this goes. This is 2009. And this dude's like, here, let me help you, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, hey, I'm Jesse, by the way. He's like, I'm Brooks. And I'm like, are you Brooks Bishop? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, dude, back in ninth grade, back in 1995, so then from there, we had complementary skills, and we both like art, and our skill sets are kind of complement each other. I think, where not just in art, but in other things too, like in all aspects of running a business, because Creaky Lantern Games is a business now. It's a real thing. It's
a serious business.
It's a serious business. So, I mean, it's a lot more than just one guy writes music and one guy writes code kind of thing. It's now there's so many hats to wear, even down to like just running like the business side of things and managing shipping and I don't even, that's a big snowball. Yeah.
Yeah. I know, running an indie. So are you sort of like half partner, or how is your like, because I initially assumed you were just sort of like a musician. You wrote music for him. You worked together, but are you a part of the business as well?
Yeah, it's us. Creaky
Awesome.
Lantern Games is Brooks and I.
Nice. And now you know the story of how the Bitmap brothers got started. No, just kidding. different set of guys. Actually, speaking of dumb questions, who had the higher Math Blasters score?
Oh, Brooks, 100%. Man, I used to be so confident with my math skills.
Gosh.
Until I met that guy, and I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. Man, you should see. So he built the engine, by the way. I just want to go off on a quick little tangent. He built this game from scratch. This game used no off-the-shelf components. There's no Unity or Unreal or anything like that. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's just not what, we set out we wanted to do from the get-go. Brooks decided, hey, let's make this an absolute thing to where we don't have to pay anybody in perpetuity for licensing and get permissions and all sorts of other stuff. It's going to be an absolute thing. We're going to own this, and this is going to be our game. And no one else can lay any kind of claim to it. And so that meant writing everything, anything that wasn't public open source, had to be written from scratch, including the game's engine itself was all, written by Brooks. So
wow, that mad respect for that. That is
awesome.
Awesome.
Extreme dedication. Awesome.
It's nuts seeing some of the mathematical geometry and stuff like that go into some of the most overlooked mundane things, like where a bullet goes. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, the math is just out of this world as far as like, you know, because the dude's got a degree in being smart. So, so he's able to implement that into all sorts of stuff in the game. And in a way, I envy all sorts of people that are able to, you know, use a GUI to map things out. Okay, then they're going to jump to here, and then this is going to happen. Oh, if the player's on this side of the screen, they're going to jump to there. But Brooks has to calculate all of that out mathematically, and it's so much respect. So when I see him do that, I think I have the easier job, you know. And his joke is he thinks he has the easier job. You know, it's just
numbers. All I got to do is sit there and do math.
Exactly.
Right?
It makes sense to him.
You have to be creative.
You know what's nice though about what you do though is this is a really interesting thing. I did a survey in a grad school class with game devs, and the one area that every single one of them felt least confident was in music. So you're set, you know, like really, nice. It is an area like they can focus on so many different things, graphics and engines and all of these things, but music is a whole different set of skills. So if you've got that on lock, I mean, you're comfortable working in games, you should be good.
Yeah, that's all I want to do. I love this. Well, I mean, I love the Street Cleaner project. I kind of the duality of my music, you know, is I get to tour and play shows all over the place and do rad stuff, you know. And then I also get to, you know, write music for video games and stuff. I mean, I feel like I tried so hard for so long, you know, to get into a game. And then it's like, once it starts, all of a sudden, you know, more and more things, once you can kind of prove yourself and things are successful and other people will see like, oh crud, like this guy knows what he's doing. Then all of a sudden more opportunities and stuff come by. But Creaky Lantern Games is definitely my first priority, and it's everything I want to do in life.
Awesome. Well, let's get into our next track here. This is from stage 3. It's called Revenger. All right, that was Revenger from Street Cleaner, composed by Street Cleaner. Pretty awesome. Pretty awesome track. I like this one.
Yeah, me too. I actually, when I first saw this track, I expected it to be more of like a dance track, because I think this plays in the like club stage, right? Like, it sounds like, you know, the guy is like sitting there looking at his headphones, like in his decks, and then it kind of breaks out into more of like an uplifting kind of song. Kind of caught me off guard a little bit.
Well, that stage is a little bit different. So every stage in the game is a little bit different. It's not all, they're not all structured the same. Like, you know, I could go over each stage, but specifically that one starts with an arena, you know? So, you have this long walk and it's silent, you know, and you have this long walk up to the entrance to this club, Turbo Drive, which is a real club in San Francisco, and we got permission. But as you walk up, we used a low pass filter, which obviously isn't going to be on an NES, but we used a low pass filter to get this thumping loop kind of thing going. And as you got closer, the loop got louder and louder and louder. And then you step into the club and the door shuts behind you. And that's when like the full dance track comes in. And so now you have to fight 3 mini bosses at one time. And it's the very beginning of the level, you know? And so it was just kind of this, you know, throwing you right into the fire. If you thought, you know, stage 2 was tough, well, this is stage 3, you know, and then just you got 4 more after this, you know. But Revenger is the only song in the game that was a pre-existing song. Like I was saying earlier, I wasn't able to transition all of the in-game songs to the full-fledged studio type tracks. I tried the other way around and it just wasn't working out. I couldn't make Street Cleaner songs sound worthy for the game. So I had kind of written that off of even trying anymore because they just sounded like cheap imitations that didn't quite fit in the game. Very rarely does that work though, you know, like Goonies Good Enough, that works. But then other than that, every time, you know, they try to stick The Power of Love or something like that in a game, it just sounds like garbage. But I'm glad I'm of like-minded company with you guys here because you understand.
Oh yeah, you can't just stick the music in the meat grinder and expect it to work, you know?
Exactly. Yeah. But Revenger was a song that came out on the EP Revenger in 2017, and it was originally written for a game that Brooks and I were working on, which I'm sure will come back up because I'd given you guys a track for it. But I had it didn't make it into this game that we were working on. Rather, the game got kind of shelved. And so I'd released the song Revenger in 2017. And then years later, you know, we're working on this, and I made a Family Tracker version of the song Revenger. And it just fell into place. It just worked for the second half, or rather the later 2/3 of stage 3, because it kind of starts off different. Like it kind of builds up, it ramps up. And the way that we handled the audio was it's not playing back NSF files in the game. Everything is dubbed down to a mono wave file at 16-bit. And Brooks had written the music handling to where I could hard code a loop points into the wave file. So literally all we had to do was add that wave file into the game, and he would put where it starts, and then once it starts, it just adheres to the rules of the music handling that he had written. So the loop points that I had assigned to it, that's what it would loop. So in the case of Revenger, that intro there, it doesn't ever come back. You know, when it loops around, it loops back in a minute into the song.
There was a period of time where music was going from chiptune to Redbook audio, and I could not stand the damn loop points that didn't work. So props to Brooks for getting that problem solved.
Yeah, he handled that 100%. Yeah, and
that's so
yeah.
funny.
I'd actually worked on other. I mean, still to this day, I mean, I got a couple songs into Wasteland 3, which was really, you know, an honor to be in a franchise like that, you know. And it's the diegetic music, so they specifically wanted that gap because it's in-game music. It's not the music that would be playing to the audience. It's music that the in-game characters would hear. So I was like,
it's like it's on the radio or something like that in the game. Yeah.
There's a nightclub, which is back to nightclubs again. There's a nightclub in the game early on, and that's where my music appears. Anyways, like I really appreciate being able to basically take the rules that I had put into the Family Tracker file, you know, where the loop points are, and then be able to carry that over hard coded into the wave file, you know, so that it would translate onto the game itself. What's really funny is, you know, the game isn't really that big. It's the music files that puff it up real big. But
oh yeah. I'm sure. I mean, just like any of the Sega CD games, right? The game's only like
2 megs, right?
Yeah,
Right,
like all the music takes up the rest. So you were talking about this unreleased game, and that we were going to play a track. Why don't we just go ahead and play it now? The game it's like a Spy Hunter type game that you did with Brooks.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
We were working on if you want to play the song first.
Let's go ahead and play it right now.
Yeah, there's no name for it. This is the first time I think anyone's heard it outside of us Creaky Lantern dudes.
Awesome. This is a really cool track. You got to reuse for something.
You really do, yeah. And we'll make sure that everybody knows that we heard it here first.
As a standalone track, I don't think it really makes much sense out of context, because the context that it was made in was we were working on a Spy Hunter type game. The idea was that synthwave is a great genre that lends itself really well to movies and video games and stuff like that, in that it's mostly instrumental and has these ebbs and flows, these swells and such, and what we had come up with is the idea that we were going to make Spy Hunter type stages, roads, but everything was going to be synced to a song, right? So you start the game and you pick a car, right? So you cycle through all the different cars, you pick the car you want to be. We hadn't decided if we wanted to make them unlockable or just all available or however that works. So you pick the car, and then then when you're in the car, you pick a tape, and then whatever tape you put into the tape player, that's what the stage is. So each song would be, I don't want to say like Beat Saber, but each song would be synced to the level, to the stage. And,
this sounds awesome. Why can't you just do this?
Making games is hard.
Nah.
So,
no way.
So we had a lot of ideas. Like there was going to be like the more poppy kind of like beachy kind of song, the more bubblegum song, and that would have like palm trees, and it would be like a beach type thing, and light would be glistening. And Brooks actually made a really, really excellent 2.5D type engine where it was a 2D over the top head perspective Spy Hunter type game, but it had this illusion of this parallax kind of, like this almost a 3D-ish parallax type illusion to where, as you go over a bridge, you could see little pieces under it as you go over it, that you couldn't see before, that kind of thing. And it was really a fun thing to work on at the time. But the thing that we wanted to do was each stage was going to be a different artist, and so I wanted to reach out to other artists and okay, so this stage is like, let's say this is more of a dark artist with a dark song. It's going to be a nighttime thing, maybe a little bit more cyberpunk-ish kind of thing, or it's a really fast outrun track. Okay, now this is going to be a really fast track, maybe something a little bit more difficult. Cars are going to be coming at you faster, that kind of thing, and so, we'd worked on it, but the hardest part of all this is getting other folks to get on board. And you get into that area where you try to, explain to people, okay, here's what we want to do. And there's so many people out there in the world that go around saying, here's what I want to do, here's what I want to do, and then they never do anything. And here we are actually trying to do something, but then getting other people on board just wasn't working out, So it's hard to be taken seriously when you have a smaller body of work.
That makes sense.
And then now getting Street Cleaner, the video game, on Nintendo Switch, is a level of legitimacy. So if we did want to move forward with a project like that, we already have something to show for it,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I mean, really, like, congrats on all the hard work. Like, honestly, like, I know it's not trivial to make a game, even if it's on Steam, but getting it onto a console is a whole nother level of, like, logistics, and I'm sure you know all about it.
Oh man, well, that was the goal from, we sat there, and Brooks and I, and I want to mention Nate too. Nate is a dude that has helped us out immensely. He also has another complementary set of skills in that he's really good with the English language and some other languages too, in that he can help us word things and come up with ideas and concepts, and he's helped us out so much immensely. I don't know if Street Cleaner, the video game, has its own strategy guide, so he wrote all the dialogue for that and stuff. But he's been with us this whole time. He's definitely in the loop, when it comes to making this stuff. But early on, the three of us are all hamming out exactly what it is we want to accomplish, what's the end goal. And from day one, it has always been Nintendo Switch. We were making a Nintendo Switch game, and I don't want to say that
That's
releasing it on the PC was a byproduct of that. But our main motivation was the Nintendo Switch. And boom, boom, we got the two biggest platforms, gaming platforms in the world outside of mobile.
Awesome.
All right, let's take a quick break here with another track. This is Stage 5, the Anvil.
or that was from stage 5 called the Anvil. This is a really excellent track. Tell us a few things about it.
The Anvil, I named the song after the Foundry from The Simpsons. Hot stuff coming through. We work hard, we play hard. It was, I think we needed something a little bit more mechanical, more, four on the floor kind of thing. And that's where that one came from. It was lost at one point in time, and I know everybody's experienced that whole, like, I lost a file, like it's a corrupted file, And
oh God, happens with this podcast all the time.
Man. And unfortunately, I just damage hacker it does that. If you don't save in redundancy, you're gonna lose things. At least my experience. So I'd corrupted that track, and I thought it was gone. I want to say a month or two. I thought that track was gone, and then one day, combing through things, I found an older version of it. Was able to repair it and get the track back. But that's the story behind that one. The Anvil.
It's an excellent track. Well, let's go ahead and keep things moving and get into stage 6. This is an Unexamined Life.
That was Stage 6, An Unexamined Life, composed by Street Cleaner for the video game.
Excellent. This is one of my favorite tracks, if not my favorite. I guess the Full Throttle, but then this one.
It's very Ninja Gaiden-esque. Very specifically, This track reminds me a lot of that, like dodging birds and.
Yeah, well, the bouncing octaves, I think, is what does it. So like.
Yeah,
maybe that's it.
I'd written 2 versions of this song. The original idea was because this is the longest stage, and there's 2 mini bosses in it. So the original idea is that we were going to have 2 versions of this song, a regular version and then an aggressive version, and they were going to play simultaneously, but one was going to be muted. And then when you got to the mini boss, it would phase to the aggressive version, kind of like what they did in the early Unreal games, where, it had like several different tracks playing at the same time, but whether you were inside or outside would pick what version of that was playing, but they're all simultaneous. And we had played with that, but it just didn't feel right compared to, like I'd said earlier, where we'd set expectations. It hadn't done that on any of the other prior levels or stages, so it just didn't work out. So there's actually 2 versions of this song, an aggressive one and then the one that you just played, which, Awesome. This is a good one.
I know we kind of brought this up in the past, but tell us about some of your past projects, some of your past work.
As far as game stuff goes?
Well, a little bit of both. I mean, I know you worked on, Eternum, and you mentioned you'd licensed a few tracks. You told us that you'd worked with Aubrey Hodges. We're just curious about some of those projects. Those are all very cool things.
I on my last Street Cleaner album that came out a couple months ago, Edge, I got to work with the legendary Aubrey Hodges. He's definitely somebody who I had adored as a teenager. We were talking about Red Book Audio. He did the music for all of the PlayStation Dooms, which I believe there are 2 or 3. There's Doom and then there's Final Doom for PlayStation. He did both of those. He did Doom 64. He did Quake 1 and 2 on the Nintendo 64. And he did Quake 3 on Dreamcast and more. And so I had always thought that was the better Doom soundtracks. And I had always said that those were the better Doom soundtracks. And as much as I have nostalgia for the Bobby Prince stuff, when you play the PlayStation version of Final Doom, it just takes on a completely different feeling. Just by the music alone, makes it more Martian and scary and more immersive rather than the rather than MIDI Alice in Chains riffs.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to those because Aubrey Hodges is a name I've heard a lot, but I actually I feel like I've seen his name. I've probably heard some of his music, but not so much of it. I think you mentioned in our chat before we started recording, he's very commonly doing ports and stuff like that, so he doesn't usually get the credit that he maybe deserves.
Yeah. I think that he's overlooked when people talk about legendary artists, or legendary game composers, because as far as I'm concerned, he is responsible for so much of the music that we heard, nerds like us that listen to video game music and stuff. But he did this thing in so Nine Inch Nails famously did the soundtrack for Quake for PC, but that didn't transfer over licensing wise to other platforms. So when the game was released on other platforms that even did have, the ability to do Red Book Audio, it didn't have that Nine Inch Nails, music on it. So what you got was Aubrey Hodges, and instead of trying to write new music, what he had done is he'd created these sound beds, lots of these big sound beds, and he took existing sounds from the game, sound fonts that would be used for an enemy, dying, rawr, kind of thing, and then he had slowed them down, pitched them way down, ran them through filters, used different effects on them, and so he wasn't creating any more space on the game, itself, because he was using sound fonts that were already in there.
Oh, that's super interesting.
Super cool. I had no idea about any of this.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I think that's really awesome. But on Quake 1 specifically, he had written 4 original songs for it that were in the between level parts, or rather in between episodes. So after the first block of episodes, it would go to a screen that would have some exposition on it, and it would play a little song, right? And those were some of the most gnarly, radical tracks I'd ever heard on a Nintendo 64. They were like, I just blew my mind how, wait, this sound is coming out of my Nintendo 64. This is insane. Like, it's so big and awesome. And so I had taken it upon myself I found this, go to Zophire's domain. There's so much stuff still there today. And I extracted the sound fonts out of the Quake 1 Nintendo 64 ROM. And then I had put those sound fonts into a VST sound font player, and I had went and reconstructed his songs using the exact samples that he had used. And I didn't make it any better. I had just reconstructed it all in FL Studio, and I was really proud of myself there, and I was just like, wow, this is how he did it, and it's like I got to wear his shoes for a moment. And
so is that how you work together? Is that how you got to work together?
I sent it to him, and it was a shot in the dark. We have some mutual friends, so I think he, it wasn't really out of the blue. So I sent it to him, and I was like, hey, I just talked to him back and forth, and he actually had the idea of, hey, why don't I throw some stuff on this, or how about this? Let's make this off model, And so it was, what we ended up doing is we wrote an original song that is a homage to Quake 1 on Nintendo 64, and it uses a lot of the same sound fonts, drums, that kind of thing, but it's also now 25 years later, if you listen to it, it starts out kind of thin, and then then Aubrey comes in with this roaring guitar, just this bestial guitar sound. And just, from there, he even threw in a trap beat, which I was not expecting. But it works. It really works. So it was a dream come true to be able to write a song with him. Other stuff, I'd licensed music to a few other games. There's a game called Hypergun that's pretty awesome. I think it's overlooked, but it's an arena type horde mode type single player game where you're put in different arenas, and that was really neat to be on a soundtrack with a lot of other. What's really weird is the soundtrack for that was like Carpenter Brute and Sung and the bigger names in the synthwave world. So it was pretty neat to be among the ranks of those guys. Then Wasteland 3, I got a couple of tracks in that was really awesome. My friend Brian was worked on that game, and when they needed music for a club part, he recommended me, and it was so grateful that all went through and that happened. They ended up there's a shotgun in the game called Street Cleaner. There's a Street Cleaner video game cabinet. If you go up to it and you inspect it, it says an old game about cleaning up the streets with your fists. So it's kind of neat. A little Street Cleaner nods in there too. Then, there's a really fun Super Meat Boy N+ type game called Exception that's on PS3 and Xbox that I have, I want to say, about a half a dozen tracks in.
Cool.
Wanted to bring up one thing here. We have a good buddy on every now and he comes on the show. It's Norm. He does this channel and on YouTube, and he brought up a question of character, Jack Slade, used on the Steam page.
A question of character. Jack Slade, the street cleaner, is a man of antisocial purification. Justice will come swift and tidy because...
Tell us about that.
Oh man, so I have an old buddy of mine, a guy who I've known, for a really long time, Danimal Cannon, posted a video a while back on Twitter, and it was basically somebody on YouTube had isolated a lot of vocals from video games and he was posting them, and I think that's where he got the name Wise from Your Grave.
Yep.
And I was just like enthralled by the depth that this person had taken and into looking into things that nobody else had broken into. And I love being able to take apart games and look at their contents. And that's exactly what he did. And I was just completely enamored. And then he posted a question of character and was just so blown away by this, a question of character thing. And his viewpoint towards things is so curt and honest. I don't know if curt's the right word, but so straightforward and honest, but hilarious at the same time.
It's so funny.
I know.
He never takes the low road either. He always takes the high road on every joke. And it's almost like the implication of what he is saying is the funniest stuff I've ever seen in my life. I love it so much. And I immediately I just had to reach out to this guy. And I'm like, hey, my name's Jesse. We just put out a game called Street Cleaner the Game. Here's a code. I didn't ask for anything in return. I was just like, hey, I just want you to have this because I think you're great and stuff. And then later, I kind of prodded him a little bit and was like, hey, you want to do a Street Cleaner episode?
I gotta say, that show, like, he used to post links into the chat a while back, and I kind of like, oh, I'll check it out later. As soon as I watched one, I literally binged almost all of them. They're so freaking funny.
They're so amazing. People say this too often. They go, oh, how come this guy hasn't blown up yet? People say that all the time. And you always see that in comments, like a song that has like 2,000 views or whatever. And people are like, hey, how come this doesn't have more plays? But in this case, like, Norm, his channel, which he's rebranded to A Question of Character now, it needs so much more love and attention, and it's definitely going to be one of those things where a few years from now, we're going to look back be like, do you remember when he only had 600 followers? Like, that's crazy.
We knew him before he was cool.
Exactly. Right, man. One of the most, just when you think you've met everybody, you know what I mean? And then you come across somebody as talented as him. It's mind blowing. Like I love everything that guy puts out. He's truly talented.
Having all the amazing people we've had on so far has been pretty mind blowing. Speaking of mind blowing, let's get into our next track here. This is from Stage 7. It's called Kindling of a Flame.
That was Stage 7, Kindling of a Flame. And oh man, that transition. Jesse mentioned it right at the beginning of the show, but it's super cool. I love it.
It's a great track.
We're actually going to play the full, I guess it's like the final boss theme, right? This is almost like the same track, but amped up even more crazily, if you can believe that. This is Stage 7, Filling of a Vessel. All right, that was stage 7, Filling of a Vessel.
Excellent.
That was a
track.
I fell asleep during that track. It was a little quiet.
Yeah.
So tell us about these 2 tracks.
So I had mentioned earlier how we had done the same. We had set expectations by doing the same boss theme for every boss for every stage, and the final stage is in essence 2 very big long boss fights back to back. Yeah, we'd set expectations with the prior boss fights all being, Famine Tracker, and so hopefully, by the time you get to this one, you haven't listened to the soundtrack already, and it should shatter those expectations by being a full-blown rendition of the boss fight, a loud, aggressive, full-spectrum song that broke out of Famine Tracker, and also with, the boss taking as many hit points as he does, which I believe is 48 compared to all prior bosses being 16. And not having 1 or 2, but 4 different phases. One of which a giant helicopter blows all the windows out of the building and starts firing at you, and that kind of stuff. So
nice,
and then from there, filling of the kindling of a flame and filling of a vessel. I mean, there's lots of hints throughout the game that there's a lot of Socrates influences throughout the entire game. So by the time you get to the end, there's a bust of Socrates on the boss's desk, and so those song names are direct taken out of quotes from Socrates himself. And then eventually when you beat the boss, the floor breaks away and you fall into a big pit where you have to fight Socrates himself.
Awesome.
Wow.
I love it. Like, I think even on your Bandcamp page there's that image at the top of the soundtrack that's like Socrates like smashing down on you or something like
a
that.
giant stone robotic marble Socrates. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was done by an amazing artist, Captain Nebros. She was in the chat during a live stream, and I guess while she was watching the live stream, she was drawing, and later she had shared that with me, and I was like, oh, this is too good. This is too amazing. Please let me license this from you, please. Like,
oh man,
immediately.
That's awesome. That's really good. So, we had a lot of fun today. We played a lot of great music. The soundtrack is a lot of fun. The game is totally fun. I didn't know what to expect, to be honest. And when I started playing, I was like, wow, it really feels like your heart was all put into this. And the game just has a really nice nostalgic feel, but also still really enjoyable to play. I swear my 7-year-old could totally enjoy this. And so it's not all nostalgia, it's just really good gameplay, and I think that's also really important. So today we covered Street Cleaner, the video game, along with a few other tracks from the man behind the music, Street Cleaner, aka Jesse Bishop. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much. I'm really thankful for you guys inviting me. This is all really awesome.
Oh no, it's our pleasure. And honestly, when your new game launches, we'll retweet it and we'll do what we can to support you. Indie game development is no easy task, and congratulations on all of the work that you've done, and we will continue to support you in whatever project goes forward.
And I just want to put out one last sentiment there is I did talk about Brooks a lot. Maybe someday in the future we can bring him in for another episode after our next game or something. But
next game sounds great.
He really lifted. He's the guy that did the majority of heavy lifting on this project, and he's a real creative force. And I've got my wagon hitched to him. So, I can't wait to see what he comes up with next and how we can do cool stuff.
Awesome. So if you want to know more about our show, you can check us out online at pixelatedaudio.com for the show notes and track lists. We can also be found on Twitter at Pixelated Audio, and we have a Discord channel that you can join. Jesse's actually in there and chatting up a storm. So please join in and join the conversation. If you like the show, you can leave comments or feedback. We always appreciate that. And if you're new to our podcast, Gene, we have a ton of stuff, right?
That's right. We've been very blessed to have a lot of great guests this year. We've been making up for some lost time. As we all know, 2020 was a very hard year, but we're trying to invite lots of fun people to talk with us about their music or their experiences with music. We've actually had a really great set of shows with composers recently. We had one with Tom Salta, which should be airing by the time this show is live. We had Dane Saint on a little while back, and this one is going back a little ways, but Berlinist talked about their work on Grease. Fantastic soundtrack. All of those people have been wonderful to talk to, and Jesse, you have as well. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thanks, guys.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. And the track taking out the show is from Stage X, the ending theme from Street Cleaner, the video game. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you back in a few weeks for the next episode.